Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Digital Grace podcast. This is episode 5 with Chris Martin, and we're here to talk about digital addiction and how it impacts spiritual formation, the church, and God's mission. Thanks for being here with us, Chris.
Sure. Glad to be here.
Well, first, just to start us off, tell us a little bit about your faith journey, when you came to know the Lord, some of just your life and ministry, where you're at right now.
Sure. Yeah, that's a lot, so I'll try to not make this a super long answer. We only have about an hour. I grew up in a place called Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is a small city in Indiana. It's about the second largest city in the state, I think. Up there, just like an hour south of Michigan, 15 minutes west of the Ohio border, tucked up there. My wife, Susie, and I both grew up there. I grew up in what I would call a Christian home. I would say that my parents, I think, were relatively new believers, or at least new to practicing faith when I was growing up. Their families weren't particularly active in their local churches or anything like that. And so I think once my parents got married and started raising a family, they were kind of new to being active in the local church. And so I grew up in a Christian home led by parents who were kind of learning to be followers of Jesus themselves, and learning to parent kids in that way. And so I'm so grateful for the ministry of the local church and the way that pastors and Sunday school teachers poured into me from a very young age. I remember being a part of something called Pioneer Club when I was a kid, which was like I don't know. I don't even know if it's slightly more fundamentalist or whatever, but it was kind of like Awana, but had semi Boy Scout vibes, but it was for boys and girls. So I don't know. It was similar to like an Awana situation. And so I remember going to that a lot as a kid. And one of the things I remember earliest as a kid regarding faith and coming to know Jesus is I remember going to Sunday school a lot. I remember going to big church a lot. And I always remember our pastor, Jim Pearson, and he was awesome. This is no slight to him. It's probably more a slight to myself and my ears at the time. I remember my pastor talking about asking Jesus into your heart a lot. You know, maybe it was at the end of a sermon or something like that. You know, you want to ask Jesus into your heart. I don't remember exactly the context, but I always remember thinking that sounds really important. It sounds like something I should want. And I think I do want, you know, I'm maybe 9 or 10 thinking this, but he's talking about asking Jesus into your heart. And I feel like this is really important. And I feel like if it's very important, I should probably do it right. But he's not saying how to do that. You know, like he's not, I want, you know, I got to do this first and then do this second and then do this. You know, I wanted even as a 9 or 10-year-old, I wanted a step by step, very clear. First you do this, then you do this, then you do that. And again, maybe he was doing that. But as a kid, second grade, whatever, I remember thinking, man, this ask your Jesus into your heart thing seems really important, but I'm not quite sure. And because I felt as though it was really important and I didn't feel like I was being given step-by-step instructions, I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm supposed to know. So I didn't ask anyone. Like I was, you know, I didn't want to be the kid who doesn't know how to ask Jesus into his heart. You know what I mean? And that's what I was afraid of. Felt like something, having gone to Pioneer Club and memorized Bible verses or whatever, it feels like something I should know. And maybe plenty of people told me how, and I just wasn't paying attention. I don't know. But I remember thinking that. And then in third grade, I remember in Sunday school, Mr. Dave, who at the time I felt was like super old. I don't know how old he was, but I was like, this guy could be my grandpa. And frankly, I don't know if Mr. Dave is still living. I can't imagine he is, but I know he was teaching Sunday school as late as like when I was in college, which is remarkable. But Mr. Dave was beloved in the church, older gentleman, wonderful guy. I remember him in third grade walking us through the sinner's prayer. And I was like, aha, finally, somebody has given me the step-by-step process I need to formally ask Jesus into my heart, become a follower of Jesus, and not go to hell. And so some Sunday in third grade, I can't tell you the date, but I'm relatively certain it was third grade, I prayed the sinner's prayer and would have called myself a Christian. But like a lot of people who probably have done things like that, you know, I was 10 or whatever, maybe 9, however old you are in third grade. I didn't really know what I was doing. You know, I just, my life didn't change. I had always been a pretty good kid, at least publicly. I was always kind of a pain at home, all the way up until the time I went off to college. Probably beyond that, my parents would say. But I was like, it's not like I was a troublesome kid at school and now I'm good because I'm a Christian. There's nothing about my life as a third grader that started producing the fruit of a Christian, best as I knew, and looking back, best as I can tell. I was still a good kid, but I was a good kid because life was easier when you're a good kid than when you're a bad kid. And it wasn't like I was trying to glorify God by being a good kid at school or anything like that. And so I just went through elementary, middle school, living a Christian life best as I knew how, tried to keep my nose clean. But again, like just pragmatically more than out of any sort of like faith oriented. If there was any faith oriented motivation, it was probably fear of like angering God more than it was like, redemptive in nature. And so, I go about life like that. Maybe that story resounds with some people listening or with yourself even. I know you came yeah, I just kind of went through that. And I was sincere about it, I guess, but I don't know. It just God was not at the center of my life as a 10, 12, 13, 14-year-old. Like, it just wasn't. I would say I was the center of my universe, and it was at that point God became one of the things that orbited me, like the Chicago Cubs and video games. You know what I mean? So when I got to my junior year of high school, I was going through a really hard time for a junior in high school. It was not like a really hard time, really, right? Like I didn't have like a close family member die, or like I had a very dear friend of mine who was a girl, basically like cut off all communication with me. And like, so I lost that relationship, which was a very dear relationship to me. It was very hard. I was a junior in high school trying to figure out who I was. A lot of social difficulties were happening when I was a junior in high school. And I felt socially adrift. I was the kid like in high school that like I was friendly with a number of different casts of people. I wasn't like a jock. I wasn't a theater kid. I wasn't a band kid, but like I had a couple friends in each of those categories. And so I felt like I didn't really fit in anywhere. I was, probably like hitting puberty at that time, or like really growing and learning about, just wrestling with all these things internally and like, and so it was just a difficult time for me, like socially, mentally, I guess. Like and I remember my pastor was preaching through the Sermon on the Mount, and he got to Matthew 6 talking about the Lord caring for the sparrows and that sort of thing. And that's Matthew 6, right? I have that right? Yeah. And it was kind of a sermon on anxiety, I remember. And anxiety was not as much in the zeitgeist of culture in 2006 when this was happening. So it's not like maybe it would be today, where it's a little bit different. But I remember him preaching and me being like, man, I am just super anxious about like my friendships and my social standing and like if I'm fitting in. And what I've found is I have functionally made a god of the relationship that I had with that girl. I've made a god of myself and my social standing with anybody. I was never a guy who wanted everybody to like me, but I did want some people to like me. And I always wondered if anybody liked me. You know what I mean? And so it was around that time that I was like, oh, my God has been this. My God has been this. My God has been this. My God has never really been the one true God. And so I would say it was junior year of high school during that sermon series, around the fall of my junior year of high school, that the Lord started to reveal to me through that sermon series and through plenty of conversations that, God has been a feature of my life. He has not been the center of my life. He's been one of the planets orbiting a sun that isn't him, when really he should be at the center. And that's when I would say I actually gave my life to the Lord as a junior in high school. And so that led, I'll summarize the second part of this, but that led to, okay, what is that? How does that affect what I want to do with my life? When you're a junior in high school, you're getting into looking at colleges, trying to settle on a possible major or general trajectory of what you might look into. And at the time I was very interested in tech, and like my dad has a computer science and tech background, and I knew that was blowing up. And so like, this was 2006, 2007, the iPhone's being announced and released. Like there's so much changing, and every a new social media platform every day. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to Purdue University, get a degree in computer science, get recruited by Google or Yahoo, and go out and make truckloads of money in Silicon Valley and also be a Christian. Like that's kind of what was in my head as a junior, senior in high school. Even once I became a Christian, like that's kind of what I had in my head. And slowly but surely, the Lord just kind of started to convict me and say, "Hey, you're chasing money more than anything. Yeah, you do have an interest in these things, but you're really chasing the cushy lifestyle and you're not letting me be Lord of your life here." So the Lord, through parents, through friends and pastors, eventually I was like, okay, what do I actually like and want to do, and how can I glorify the Lord in that? And so I decided to pursue teaching high school English. So I went off to college. I changed where I was planning to go to college. Because of this, I decided to pursue a degree I'd never really thought to pursue. Then toward the end of my freshman year of college, some friends pulled me aside, other college freshmen, and said, "Hey, we think the Lord," this was probably like March of my freshman year of college. I was an English education major at a small Christian school, planning to go teach high school English. That was my plan. And some friends pulled me aside and they said, "We think the Lord is calling you to a life of ministry, and you're just a coward." And I said, "You know what? I think you might be right." I'd been leading a Bible study at the time. I was really active in some ministry areas, and they were like, we think the Lord's calling you to ministry, and that you're just resisting it because you're afraid of what that means, or you're afraid because you don't know what that means." And they're exactly right. It's not that I was afraid of the idea of ministry or that I was afraid of anything in particular. I was afraid because I had no idea what it would look like. Being a high school or English education major, it's like, you're going to go teach high school English. That's basically all you can do, unless you go get some other certification. Like your road is set. And I've always been a planner. Like that's what I want to do. And so what scared me most about pursuing a life of ministry wasn't the idea of ministry, but that I had no idea what that would actually mean. The path before me was like a wide open field, and I don't like that generally. And so the Lord worked in my heart in that time. I changed my major to Bible and just said, "Lord, I have no idea what this is going to mean, but let's see." I assumed when you go into ministry, you become a pastor or you become a missionary. Don't really want to live abroad, so I figure I'm going to become a pastor. Pursue that throughout college, eventually graduate, get married to the girl that I lost as a junior in high school. The Lord was kind to deliver that girl, Susie, to me. And so we became friends again, and eventually got married. Got married after college, right when we graduated, and went to seminary. Was planning to just go to seminary right away, full time. Eventually got a job right after college in Nashville, Tennessee, and ended up doing seminary, kind of like a hybrid through my local church, which was kind of like a satellite campus, and also online, a little bit of both. And did seminary, my degree through Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, finished in the spring of 2017. Spent 7 years working at Lifeway Christian Resources, working in a kind of ministry I'd never, like going into Christian publishing, and it was just never on my radar. And what I found, Kobe, I'll wrap this up here. What I found in my life experience since that, like, kind of career trajectory is that it really is just best to trust the Lord, because I'm so grateful for the path that He set me on. And though I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to be a planner or think about what's next, I think there's a lot of fruit to come with that. I think what the story of my life and career has been me rightly, I think, trying to chart what's next, but learning to hold that with an open hand and not a closed hand. And the Lord has been merciful and kind in letting me hold things in my hand and honoring plans I make or charts, charting the path that I've charted, while also convicting me in places I need to be convicted and reminding me to hold those things with an open hand. So though when I set out, I thought and wanted and still want to some degree a life of full-time pastoral ministry, the Lord has not seen fit to that. I've found ways to serve in my local church, which we adore our local church, and currently I serve with a ministry called the Rooted Network, where I help get the word out about the resources we provide for discipleship in the local church, and also help write some of those resources. And so, have enjoyed my time there, and also enjoy serving as a community group leader in our local church. And I served on staff for a time leading our student ministry, so I've always enjoyed working with teenagers. So yeah, that's a little bit of kind of how we got to where we're at, and we live here outside Nashville, Tennessee, which we love, and we don't ever really plan to leave. Um, along the way, I've continued to write a lot, and maybe that's a little bit of what we'll talk about. I didn't include a whole lot of that, but have always loved writing, and have continued to do that well into my adult years. So.
Well, praise the Lord for his faithfulness in your life. And I resonate with so much of it. Wanting to plan, wanting to have clarity on the future and have a vision for what my life would be like, and continually just having to submit it to the Lord. So I hear that, and am encouraged that you've continued to pursue faithfulness with however the Lord has led in your life. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I'd love to hear, especially for our audience who don't know you, and kind of why we're having this conversation. You've written two different books on kind of social media, or just the social internet, maybe more broadly. Terms of Service is one, and then The Wolf in Their Pockets. And so tell us a little bit about maybe the premises of those two books, and what motivated you to write those.
Yeah, so I'll start with what made me want to write them, and then I'll get to the premise of each. Um, I've written about a lot of things over the years. I started blogging when I was 13, on LiveJournal back in the day. Yeah, when I was in like eighth grade, I was blogging, trying to impress girls. One of my early readers was the girl who is now my wife, so I guess it worked. And so I started blogging really young. Then through high school, one of the things, like I had a tech column in my high school newspaper. So like I covered in my high school newspaper the release of the iPhone, the first iPhone, which like my white hair is showing, I suppose. But so like I always loved that. For a period, I wanted to be like a sports writer. So I've always really, really loved writing. And since in my like adult years, one of the first writing projects I worked on, when I was like 22, a friend that I worked with at Lifeway, his name's Trevin Wax. He's a Christian author, written a handful of books. We worked at Lifeway together, and one day he approached me in the cafeteria at Lifeway, and he said, "Hey, I'm looking to mentor somebody in writing. Would you be willing to be mentored by me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man, let's do it." And so he mentored me as a writer for a long time. Still mentors me just in life, but he was like, "I really think," this was again in 2013, 14. He said, "I think we need so many of these people talking about doing ministry to millennials," which was a hot topic at the time. So many of these people talking about doing ministry to millennials are saying the way you reach millennials is by changing what you believe to basically get more liberal theologically. And he's like, "I just don't think that's the right answer. And I think we should have a more like theologically conservative millennial to talk about how to do real ministry to young people." At that point, we were young people, without having to just like compromise what you believe. And so I was like, "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." And so I did that for a while, kind of under his tutelage, and had this blog called Millennial Evangelical. And I did that for a number of years, wrote a book on it, that I don't really talk about because it was like very poorly written, but it was my first attempt to do anything like that. And so then after a while, that was 2017, that kind of ended. I just went into this writing drought. Like, I feel like I didn't have anything to say that was worthwhile. I had started I'd become the head of social media at Lifeway and was just like very consumed with that in work. And so I just didn't have anything to say. Every time I sat down to write from like 2017 to 2020, I was like, I had ideas, but I would write 100 words and just be like, "Who cares? Nobody cares what I have to say. Like, I don't even care what I have to say." And I just stopped. Like, I probably drafted 100 articles that nobody ever read, because I was just so, I don't know, tapped out, burnout. I don't know. But then, like 2019, I read Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. It was the first time I'd read Technopoly by Postman back in college and was vaguely aware of what he had to say, but I had never read Amusing. And I read it in like 2019, and it just blew my mind. And I was working as the head of social media at Lifeway. We had like 270 social media accounts and like 60 people who oversaw those, and I was overseeing all of that all the time. And I was just seeing what social media was doing to people like on a daily basis. I mean, when we at Lifeway, when we closed bookstores in 2017, I was running social media, and we had people cussing us out in our DMs for closing Christian bookstores. Like Christians cussing us out for closing Christian bookstores. And so I just started to get like jaded, frustrated, seeing what social media was doing to people, particularly people of faith. And then I came to read, somehow, maybe by a friend's recommendation, came to read Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I was like, oh my gosh, this book was written in 1985, and it could not be more relevant than it is right now. Like, I remember his chapter on the Telegraph. I remember thinking, you could just replace the word Telegraph with Twitter throughout this whole chapter, and it is 100% transferable. And at that time in 2018, 2019, there were not many Christians writing about social media. Now, praise God, there are a ton. You could throw a stone and hit 12. But back then, either I wasn't attuned to them or there truly weren't that many. And Sam James was doing it some, Jason Thacker was doing it some, but there just weren't many people. Some people would, like Trevin would talk about it occasionally, but it was not the primary focus of anyone, of many that I could tell. Tony Reinke was doing it some, but he was focused even more just on like technology and phones. So he did like 12 ways your phone's changing you. And even that, I was like, I don't want to talk about screens. I don't want to talk about phones. I don't want to talk about technology. I want to talk about social media. And I felt I had pretty solid personal experience in my job. And so I started, I was like, I now have it's like I had all this pent up writing energy, right? That was just frustrated and like couldn't be expelled anywhere. And then I was like, what if I tried to be a Christian Neil Postman in the social media age? Not that I think I could be him, don't get that idea, but just like if I were to have a genre, a lane, what if my lane was modernizing, Amusing Ourselves to Death for the social media age from a Christian perspective? Because Postman was not a Christian, though he was friendly to Christians. And so that's what I set out to do. So I created this cheekily titled newsletter called Terms of Service, and on this new platform called Substack, which was it was new. It was started in 2017. So when I started in 2019 or 2020, it was not brand new, but very few people were using it. And I was like, I'm just going to do this Substack thing. I brought my newsletter subscribers over from my other thing. And I said, I'm just going to start writing about social media, kind of as pretending I'm Neil Postman, who's a Christian, in 2020. And COVID was happening at the same time. I was about to have a daughter be born. And so I started writing that newsletter. And people really latched onto it, really found it to be helpful. I was in a writing groove. I had all this energy. I was writing 2 or 3 times a week. And eventually proposed that as a book idea. B&H picked it up and wrote that. And so that's what led to kind of this lane that I had been in for a while. Terms of Service was written first, The Real Cost of Social Media. I wrote that in 2020. I don't think it was published till 22. But I wrote that to be sort of a mirror. I call that my mirror book. So Terms of Service was written for the Christian to read and look in the mirror with regard to how am I using social media? What's my relationship with social media, and what is it doing to me? So that was Terms of Service. And then, like, as soon as Terms of Service came out, I mean, I may have just turned it in. I don't even know if it had come out yet. I had an idea for a second book that Terms of Service was written for anybody, like probably for Christians, but for not just for leaders, just kind of for anyone. And I was like, man, as I was writing this, I kept feeling myself veering toward writing it for the church leader, but I'm like, this is not a church leader book. It's not a church. So I had to keeping myself on the road for the layman to read it. And so I was like, I really think I could and should write a book for church leaders on social media, specifically for church leaders. And so as soon as I turned it in, or as soon as terms came out, I started writing up a proposal for a second book. And the second book, the premise was okay, rather than being a mirror, this is meant to be more of like a microscope, if you will. I don't mean that in the way that it's sometimes used pejoratively or negatively, but like if terms of service was like, how is social media affecting me? The wolf in their pockets is meant to be, how is social media affecting the people I'm responsible to lead? So looking outward rather than inward. I would encourage a lot of people to probably read both, because the wolf in their pockets, though it may convict the reader, is not necessarily designed to convict the reader. It's really meant to equip the leader to lead others who are struggling with social media and their relationship with it. So with Wolf, it ended up not being just for pastors. It really was kind of like, if you're responsible to disciple anyone, whether you're a parent, a pastor, church leader, small group leader, whatever, if I were going to write a parent specific book, that would be quite a different ordeal. And others have done that well. But the wolf in their pockets was kind of like, all right, you're discipling other people. Here's how you disciple people who are being shaped by social media more than you, more than scripture, more than by scripture or anything else. So that's the premise of the two and how they're a bit different. Miraculously, my suggested titles on both books stuck. Most authors who are writing books title their books and they don't keep, yeah. But to be fair, I have sat in titling rooms and helped title books, so I had a little bit of an advantage. But the wolf in their pockets is also just kind of meant to be a bit cheeky in that everyone's concerned about the wolf. You know, if you're shepherding people, the wolves out there. And my idea was, you're concerned about, as a shepherd, protecting your flock from the wolves out there, but your sheep are just carrying wolves around in their pockets.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wasn't able to read Terms of Service, sadly, but I was able to read The Wolf in Their Pockets. And for those of you listening, it's a great resource if you're leading or discipling anyone, to be able to be aware of some of the unique challenges that social media faces. We face with social media. So thank you for writing it. It really is a good one. I'm grateful for it. Any ways that you've seen how those books have impacted people? What's been kind of the main takeaways as you've written both of those that people have voiced?
Yeah, I think that some people, I think both books have helped people reflect on their own, even though one is more written to look outward and one's more written to look inward. I think both books have helped people reflect on their own relationship with social media. Wolf is, yeah, I guess I've seen people try to take terms and lead with it, and I think that can be done. But it's kind of like, that's why Wolf was written, and so I think Wolf has probably been read by more people than Terms, and has, because back when I was starting to write on social media, even when Wolf, or when Terms was released in 2022 or whenever that was, I was still having to convince people that this was a problem. Which is just really funny to think about now, because Jonathan Haidt has kind of just blown the roof open on that. Like, nobody has to be convinced that social media is a problem anymore. And really, COVID did this as well as anything, because we kind of took social media to its limit relationally, I think, to some degree during COVID. And we are all like, oh, this can be useful, but it definitely is broken in some ways. And since then, I think that's just continued to be played out. So I don't have to convince people anymore that social media is a problem that we're all wrestling with. But early in the time, and like when Terms was released, it was kind of like, what's the point? Like, what do we need this for? So Wolf, I think, I probably gotten more feedback on that as a tool that churches are using to lead their staffs through, or to lead small groups through. I've spoken to a lot, you can imagine, a lot of like parent groups or student ministry groups over the years. And I think that's good. I think that teens in particular, as Jonathan Haidt has described in his work, teens in particular struggle with social media. But I think something I'm always careful to say is, we would be mistaken if we think social media is a teenage problem, is a youth problem. I think boomers use social media just as, if not more, irresponsibly than their children or their grandchildren do. And so I think that we would be mistaken to think that social media is just a teenager or young person problem. I think they might have some unique challenges with it, but I think it's kind of a problem everybody has. So the wolf in their pockets. The biggest feedback I've gotten from that in the last few years has just been, hey, this helped us reflect on these issues as a church family, as a small group, because sometimes I think social media can be such an idol for people, it's a sacred cow that people just don't want to talk about. That's like if a small group leader were to bring it up, people might get defensive. Whereas if you have someone like me through a book that's kind of like an external third party be the one bringing to the fore all of these issues, it can help open the door to some harder conversations than if the pastor or the parent or the small group leader were to just start having that conversation on their own. So I think that's some of the feedback I've heard, particularly about Wolf in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious from your vantage point. I've definitely run into that kind of defensiveness or hesitancy in sparking the conversation one on one. What do you, I mean, other than it being potentially the sacred cow, there being an idolatry there, or do you think there are any things that make it a particularly difficult conversation to have in our kind of cultural moment?
I think there are two things that come to mind. One is it is functionally a god for a lot of us. Um, if you just look at the amount of time we spend with it, and the ways that we let it drive our emotions, our decisions. I mean, think about how many times people are making decisions based on ads they see on Instagram, TikToks they watch. Um, Social media is the strongest discipleship force in the world, with the understanding that the Holy Spirit trumps everything. But like in terms of um, breadth and number of people being shaped and formed, social media is crushing it. And so I think we need to be aware of that. And that's why it's hard for a lot of people to talk about it, because it is functionally serving as a god for them, and they know that their relationship with it is unhealthy, but they would prefer to just not go there. Much like we would not prefer to talk about a lot of things that we struggle with. Secondly, I think a lot of people like to think that it's private, like that it's a matter like money or something like that, that like you don't have a right to go there with me. I tell a story in Wolf that was particularly heartbreaking, and I won't go into all the details, but like I was speaking with a pastor that I was speaking with a pastor who they had a woman in their church spouting off on social media about something really difficult going on in her life, and that she was basically like calling for help to some degree. And she was like, I think, criticizing someone, but also saying like things are really hard for me. And so they had someone from their women's ministry reach out to this woman and say, hey, we were meeting as a church staff. We saw you. Someone said they saw your Facebook post. We thought maybe you said you could use some help. Is there any way we can help you? It was not a, hey, close your yap about politics or whatever. It was nothing like that. It was like, hey, we saw your post. Like, it seems like you're having a hard time. How can we come alongside you and help you? And the woman got super defensive and said, that is my social media, my Facebook post. I don't want you to be engaging with me about that. Like that's my own concern. It shouldn't be a concern of you, the church staff or the women's ministry at church. That's private, effectively. I forget what the exact quote was, but basically like, that's private, stay out. And it's like, holy cow. First of all, you posted this publicly on Facebook. Secondly, even if you send something like that in a direct message to someone, the idea that the church should stay out of that is ridiculous. I think in a healthy understanding of how the church is supposed to step in. at least to help people, let alone like convict them of sin or whatever else. And so I think people just want to assume that what they do online is a personal matter, and that it shouldn't be the job of the church to care about those things. Whether in a, we need to come alongside you and have some sort of correction or conviction, that's obviously going to be a hard conversation. Or even in a, we saw you kind of asking for help. Can we help you? She and others, I think, are embarrassed by that, despite the fact that it's posted publicly. And so I think those are a couple things, and those are just a couple examples. I've heard many iterations of that kind of thing over the years.
Yeah. Uh, Context that's highly individualized, right, as Westerners. And even though it's, yeah, being posted publicly, that it's just a matter of privacy, right? Which is hard. That's a hard bridge to cross for a lot of people. Um, well, I'd love to hear maybe how you think through, like practically, if a person's trying to evaluate their level of addiction. So I use that language. I don't know if that's language that you're comfortable with or think is appropriate for this. I've talked with some people who kind of lean away from maybe the psychological language and prefer the theological terms, but I'm kind of using that at this point in terms of someone evaluating how addicted or when should they kind of move away from the patterns that they're living into. What are some of those markers that you often recommend, say, yeah, for a person's coming to you and asking, when do I know that I'm probably using this too much? What are those markers on your end?
Yeah, I am count me among the people who's hesitant to use the addiction language, just because it is a technical psychological term, and I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or anything. But I think functionally, we are a lot of us are addicted to social media to some degree. If you define addiction as just sort of compulsively, without intention, using it, like if you just make it that baseline, then yeah, I think all of us either have been or currently are to some degree. I by that base definition, I am currently addicted to social media because I will randomly open an app and scroll without even necessarily thinking about it. I think that addiction to the point of unhealth, is it impacting relationships? Is it impacting your ability to function? That might be a different level or whatever. I think markers, you asked for markers of that. I think, again, like, I would say I don't have a stat on this, but I would say probably most people who use social media regularly are using it compulsively and unintentionally. Sitting at the doctor's office just to pass time, you open Twitter or Instagram without even thinking about it. It's just kind of like the first place your thumb goes when you've got 5 minutes of downtime. That's not necessarily like unhealthy. I mean, it's maybe not ideal, right? Like maybe we should take a book with us to the doctor's office rather than just scroll on Instagram. But that doesn't mean that it's like wrecking your relationships with your kids necessarily. And so I would say, like, be aware of that. At the same time, like, go to the place where everyone is afraid to go and check your screen time. The thing is, there's no right answer or wrong answer on screen time necessarily. I'm never I always want my screen time to be going down. I would have to delete all my social media apps to be totally comfortable with the amount of screen time I have. But I think that monitoring screen time, if you have a spouse or someone with whom you have a trusted relationship who can hold accountable to that. But I would say a marker of addiction is if your social media use on screen time is alarmingly high, and there's not a number for that. I think that this is why it's hard, is like, how much time are you doing that versus doing things that are more redemptive? How much time are you doing that rather than sitting at the dinner table with your family? Because you could be spending 3 hours a day on a social media app, if you will. You could be spending 3 hours a day on a social media app, but somehow, not necessarily impinging on real relationships. I don't know. Everyone's life is different. I never want to assign a number to what is healthy or unhealthy. But the parent who uses it every night for 30 minutes at the dinner table and only uses it for 30 minutes at the dinner table might have a far less healthier relationship than a 21-year-old who uses it for 2 hours a day. That's why it's hard to pin down. But I think that if you see social media affecting your relationships, there's probably an issue. And if you don't, if someone else sees it, because the thing with addictions like this, or any sin or unhealth, is you often can't see it yourself. So if someone is saying, "Hey, I think this is affecting your relationships, or affecting how you relate to other people," if it's affecting your mood, um, dramatically, that's one of the things I've struggled more in my life with social media affecting me mentally and emotionally than I have with it like taking over my day. And from a time perspective. And so like I've had to just like delete social media apps more because, oh man, being on Twitter just like frustrates me or whatever, more than, oh, Twitter's keeping me from talking to my wife. So I think for everyone it's probably different. Where I would say, just to get into a little bit of the advice space, one, you need to have somebody who can hold you accountable. And whatever that, there's no, again, no right, there's probably some wrong answers for how to do that. There's no like single right way to do that. But they need to be able to like have the screen time passcode on your phone, or be able, like, they need to have permission to be able to call you out, right? Without having their head bitten off by you by calling you out. If you're married, this is easily your spouse. If you're not married, it's a trusted friend in your small group, pastor at your church, mentor, someone who you see regularly and knows you to know how this could be affecting you. Secondly, on the time thing, I want to recommend, I should probably get like a referral code for this at some point. But on the screen time thing, I've had a really great experience with the Brick tool. If anyone is familiar with the Brick tool, just search Brick phone thing. Search that Brick phone thing in Google. It is a little piece of plastic that you'll pay way too much money for to magnet to your fridge or other place in your home, where you can basically, it's like a screen time passcode, but you have to go to a physical place and tap your phone to unlock any kind of apps you want to put behind the lock. And so my social media locks every day at 5 p.m. and doesn't unlock until I lock it the next morning, usually when I'm like going out to my office in the backyard. So that way, unless sometimes I'm unlocking in the evening for reasons, for whatever reason, but usually my social media is off on my phone. It's locked out from 5 p.m. until I go out to my office the next morning. That way I'm guarding time with my kids in the evening, guarding time with my wife. Sometimes, it's like last night I watched the USA World Cup game as we're recording. I wanted to be scrolling Twitter and seeing what people were talking about during that game. So I unbricked my phone while I was watching the World Cup game. It's whatever. You don't have to be legalistic about it. But by and large, having that device has really helped me stay off my phone in times that are most important to not be on my phone. So, and what I found is, honestly, kind of ironically, is that's kept me off my phone even in the times when I could theoretically be on it. So even in times when social media is unlocked on my phone, largely during my working hours, I'm working. So I'm not really paying attention to it anyway. So I would say, like, where I could probably be better, a growth point for me, is on the weekends, because it's just I'm not working and my phone is unlocked. So it's probably easier for me. I'm not keeping track of it super closely, but it's probably easier for me to be scrolling stuff on the weekends, because I'm not locking it down as hard, because there's more time. But anyway, so that's a little bit of signs I would say to be on the lookout for, as well as some ways to guard against.
Yeah, I was recently just talking to someone about the Brick app, and I actually have the Wise phone. Are you familiar? Wise Phone 2, but it's like a Samsung Galaxy body, but no access to social media apps, email, but it has like Spotify and Google Maps and things like that that are still very tool based. So I would highly recommend that as well. That's helped me reduce in a ton of ways. But yeah, but the Brick app is a great resource. So for those listening, for sure, check it out. Um, so you both of these books you wrote, I guess the most recent was The Wolf in Their Pockets, 2022. So they've had about 4 years or so since you wrote it. Um, is there anything that you've seen that's changed since that time? Anything that you would maybe like refine of your argument to meet us in this kind of moment with social media? Has it advanced that much? Is there anything that you're seeing with the prevalence of AI kind of incorporated into that. Um, yeah, part of the reason I'm asking that question is where are we going? You know, where are you seeing this kind of developing and wanting us to be aware of how that might impact us?
It's really funny that you asked that. I should have reread part of the book before our conversation because I probably haven't cracked open. I've had plenty of conversations about Wolf in the last 4 years, 5 years, but I haven't cracked open the book in probably like 3 years. Um, so I don't know that I would change anything. I don't know that I would go back and say, I was wrong on that. I could have been wrong on some stuff, but I think that I was just observing a lot of what was going on. I think toward the back of that book, I made some prognostications that are probably wrong. Um, or I think it was maybe at the back of terms that I did that. But I think that if I were to write it today, I think I have a chapter in there on misinformation slash conspiracy theories. Obviously, AI would have to be a significant part of that chapter. Um, it might merit its own chapter, but I'm not an AI expert, which is just a very different space than social media. They obviously intersect, but I'm not an AI expert by any means. I'm kind of having to be, but I think that obviously if I wrote that book today, there would have to be a lot about deception regarding artificially created content. I would talk a lot more about dead internet theory than I did. I think I mentioned it either in terms or Wolf. I don't remember which. The idea that the internet is mostly uh, run by bot content and very little by human content, which has historically been a quote unquote conspiracy theory, but called the dead internet theory. But more and more that's proving to be true. And large language models are only going to make that more true as the vast majority of internet traffic is bots, not people. And the vast majority of internet content is going to start to become bots and not people. And so I would probably have to include more about that today if I were to write it today. Um, but I would never write that book today. It's so funny. Like I wouldn't, for good or for ill, I wouldn't write that book today because there are so many more people writing about social media today that I think are doing a better job of it than I did. So I just like I think that we have plenty of. I'm not saying anybody has to stop if they are doing it, but there are plenty of people writing about that subject now. And when I began, there were just not that many. And I'm so grateful that there are so many that, frankly, probably have more insightful things to say than I do. That I don't know that I would write it today. Again, for good or for ill, I wouldn't feel as though I can have anything new to say. But yeah, I think AI. I think obviously, if I were to write it today, all the new research pushed by Jonathan Haidt and Freya India and her book Girls would have to be in there. But at the time when I was writing these books, part of the challenge was that their social media hadn't been around long enough for there to be very many solid long-term studies on the effects of social media, particularly on young people. And now that social media is getting older, people like Jonathan Haidt, Freya India are starting to publish more work around anxious generation, girls, about how social media is affecting young people. So if I were writing the book today, I would definitely be citing them regularly. I would be seeing how much I could legally pull from their books to put in mine because both of those books have been super impactful and meaningful in terms of explaining how social media is affecting young people and particularly young girls. But at the time I was writing Wolf, some of that first data was just starting to come out. So
Gotcha. Yeah. So thinking about that, right, the conversation surrounding social media, do you feel like there are any gaps that you're like, man, this needs to be talked about more than maybe what it is? I'd love to hear your perspective there.
yeah, it's a great question. So I'm a little bit out of the space now. I don't write and read it in it as much as I used to. I'm a little bit in that season where I described from 2017 to 2020 where it's like I feel like I've said almost all I can say about social media and I don't know what I have anything to say about now. I occasionally still I write on my newsletter just kind of whatever comes to mind. But I think that something that I would I think deserves more focus is the effect of social media on old people. Like when I was growing up, and I mean even still now, but certainly until like 2015 to 2020, like old folks, the 60 to 90 retired and older folks, their primary mode of discipleship was cable news. And that was a big thing that we talked about a lot, and that was a big piece of conversation when it came to discipling boomers and older folks generally. Some people wrote, and I remember reflecting someplace about just going to like nursing homes and people are just tuned into cable news in every room. Like it's just like they're being discipled by it constantly. Um, that's starting to shift from 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, retirees being discipled by cable news, though they certainly still are, to they're going to spend the waning years of their life scrolling on Facebook. That's happening even before they're retired or whatever. But I think that something that churches should be concerned about and aware of is that what I described earlier is this is not a young person's problem only. It certainly is a young person's problem. But why are we having nights about social media for the youth group and not for the elderberries ministry? Like, because they're scrolling Facebook and sharing cringe memes just as much as the 14-year-olds are. Not scrolling Facebook, but scrolling Instagram or whatever. So I haven't seen, and maybe it's because I'm not looking, I haven't seen a ton of people talking about that. And I want, and maybe I'm the person who just needs to do it. Maybe this is a space where I need to open my mouth again. But I think somebody should be like, the boomers are not okay. And if we have this idea that 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds have an unhealthy relationship with social media, and this is a young person's issue, if in the year of our Lord 2026 we still think that that is the thing, we are wrong. And I think we're missing how our retirees and elderly folks are being shaped by Facebook more than they're being shaped by the local church. And so I think that that's something I was passionate about before, and I still care a lot about. And I'm not seeing many people talk about it. Maybe my head's just in the sand, but I think that's something that merits some conversation.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should tag team that one. I resonate with that because, man, I've felt very similarly, right? Like, yes, it's affecting the youth. Yes, I'm Gen Z, and was impacted in so many ways by it. But at least from what I've seen, it seems like there's more and more stats coming out about the elderly being more and more isolated. And so naturally, the way in which they would go about connecting with the younger generation is, well, they're going to go where those people are. If they're not physically in close proximity, they're going to go online, right? They're going to go to your Facebooks, your Instagrams. And so, what is the effect on the elderly in their waning years? Years where, historically people were passing down wisdom, telling stories, sharing of their life with the younger generation. That's happening less and less. And now they've kind of reverted the role, right? Like they should be pouring out, but they're just consuming, this information out of a desire to genuinely connect with the people that they love and the people who they might not be close to. And so, yeah, so I feel a lot of the same burdens. I'll be curious to see the research that maybe comes out on that demographic of people in our churches as well, or just society. So, and maybe we tag team it, maybe pick it up again.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. Um, Man, one of the things that I really appreciate about your book, The Wolf in Their Pockets, I feel like you really, maybe more clearly than some of the other books that I've read, address the moral component of being obsessively using our devices, right? Using the language of idolatry, right? That's a significant thing. Um, what what have been some gospel encouragements that you've experienced, right? Because I'm sure you've felt some of those convictions as you've been using it for yourself. What gospel encouragements have you been comforted by as you've addressed the moral component of overuse on devices?
Yeah, I think that like I am with any sin that I fight, the Lord covers it. The Lord has grace for it. And community is everything when it comes to combating it. I would have, if my wife were not as good at calling me out on my social media overuse or whatever the symptoms are, whether it's affecting my mood or she sees me scrolling my phone when I shouldn't be or whatever. If I didn't have my wife to call me out on that, I would be in such a worse state than I am. So I think that anyone who wants to try to combat social media malpractice, whether it's addiction and using it too much, whether it's the mood swing is affecting your mood in dramatic ways or inhibiting your ability to make decisions or it's making you a compulsive shopper or sports gambler or whatever else, however it's negatively affecting you. If you think you're going to do that alone, you're not. You're not. And so I think a gospel encouragement for me is that it's not a battle that you can fight on your own. Again, just like not only any addiction, but any sin, period. You need the local church, whether that's just your spouse, who is hopefully also a member of the local church, or your small group, or some kind of like maybe there's an addiction, a social media addiction group that's together, that specific. Lord, may there be a day when we have such things because Lord knows we need them probably. Whatever that looks like, I think that one of the encouragements for me personally has been the role of community in that, because I have friends who can and have called me out on social media use over the years, whether I'm saying something silly on social media that I shouldn't, I'm like spouting off about something or they see me using it too much or whatever. And so I think one of the biggest encouragements for me is the role of true gospel centered community in the fighting of this. Because again, there's nothing unique about social media use with regard to how Christ covers that sin and that struggle. I mean, just like he would cover pornography addiction, just like he would cover alcoholism. Like, I think that making an idol of social media and its role in our lives, and the thing that's funny about social media, just like with alcohol or so many of these things, you could be making an idol of it and hate it at the same time, right? We don't have to like be in love with social media for it to be our God. We can disdain it and it still be our God too. And so I think, like with any of those other sins, Christ covers them. God gives us grace to fight them, to turn away from them. But I think practically speaking, a gospel encouragement that I have experienced is the role of community in that. And the reality, sometimes it's discouraging that I can't fight this and white knuckle this on my own. But it's also been an encouragement that, I'm not meant to do this on my own. And this is a burden that I can share and I need to share with others, because if I try to bear it on my own, I'm just going to be crushed by the weight.
Yeah, I was talking to Dr. Thacker, I think last podcast. He was saying that as well, just the necessity of community, right? It seems to just be a consistent theme. We need the need for the local church to help shape us, inform us, as opposed to just sitting and scrolling and letting social media be that primary discipler in our lives. Yeah, that's very real. Um, you've mentioned a couple of times, other people who are kind of in the space of talking about social media, trying to address it. For Christians, who would you say go read their stuff, right? As we're kind of concluding this conversation, if someone's looking to, pick up resources or listen in on conversations, obviously I want to encourage them to go read your books as well. But are there other people that you just appreciate? You're like, yeah, you need to go look at that.
Yeah, sure. So, not everyone I list, I'm going to list a few people. Not all of them are Christians. Some of them are, and not all of them only write on this too. So take all of that with those caveats. Sam James and his work is great. He writes I think, pretty broadly. In fact, and I disagree with him on a lot of things, but his book, Digital Liturgies, is a great resource and has been really useful to a lot of people. I think his work there is good. I think Austin Gravely in his work, his newsletter Digital Babylon, I think is what it's called. He does a lot of great work with that. So those are two Christians writing in this space that I would recommend. And it's hard. I'm trying to think of others who write a lot in this space. And these days, a lot of guys who are writing on this topic are writing on other things too. So like Ian Harbour has written on this some, but he's writing on some other things. He helps over at Mere Orthodoxy. And there have been great articles in Mere Orthodoxy on this topic, but they're obviously writing about a lot of different things. Some non-Christians, or at least I know some of these people aren't Christians. I don't know if they're Christian for some of them, but Jonathan Haidt, read everything Jonathan Haidt writes about social media and its impact on young people. Anxious Generation should be required reading for all parents and leaders of teenagers. So Anxious Generation, great resource. Freya India's book Girls, which if you're looking at video is right over my shoulder up here, talks specifically about social media's impact on Gen Z girls. And it is, and it's written from the perspective of a Gen Z girl. And it is disturbing. Wasn't surprising to me. It was sort of old hat for me. I read it really quickly, but her personal accounts were striking and disturbing. And so I had read a lot of the stats she's sharing. She's sharing a lot of the stuff that Dr. Haidt was revealing, but her personal anecdotes and just kind of like on the ground as a young woman, and the ways that social media discipled her in ways that I was writing about girls like her in my books when she was going through some of those kinds of things. And so that was really striking. And so if you are listening and you find yourself as a parent of girls, or leading a girls ministry or student ministry, Girls by Freya India is a really hard to read but important resource. I think it's about the commodification of girls generally, but it's specifically with regard to social media. And so those are resources I can think of off the top of my head. Sam James, Austin Gravely, Ian Harbour, some, though he writes about a handful of things. Jonathan Haidt, Freya India. Those are people I'm reading pretty regularly.
Thank you for those. Any just last encouragements for the audience on our end that you just feel burdened to share? Anything that is just a common takeaway you would want to leave people with on this conversation, just trying to address digital addiction?
Yes. Social media and digital technologies, social media specifically, digital technologies are not going away. It's going to become increasingly difficult to unravel our lives from them. So I think while being a sort of modern Luddite sounds really appealing, including to people like me, it's going to be really hard to do that. And so I think our best course of action as Christians is to learn how to live among these things rather than stick our heads in the sand and pretend like they're going to go away, or that there's some sort of passing fad or whatever. And so I think the more we can equip ourselves with resources like your Substack, any of the other people I've mentioned, and take them seriously, the better off we're going to be as followers of Jesus. And so I would just encourage anyone listening to take these things seriously and not let them pass. It's an ongoing, like I mentioned to you, like just on the base definition of being addicted to social media, you could call me that today. And I think we all go through seasons of health and unhealth, and there have been seasons of life where I've had every social media app deleted from my phone. Those were healthy seasons. There have been seasons where I've had social media apps on my phone, but have engaged them in a healthy way. I probably find myself right now in between those two poles of being in a really healthy relationship with social media and being a really unhealthy. And so I think just being honest about our relationship with these things and always seeking community as we relate to them is huge. So just don't wall this part of your life off from other people. And it's so tempting to do that because we feel sensitive, we feel shame or whatever else, but keep these things in the light. And I think social media can be redemptive. I'm not, people have said over the years, why are you so negative about social media? Well, because I don't think anybody has to be convicted of the positive things or be reminded of the positive things. There are great like things that are good and fun and entertaining. That's not bad. But I think all of us do, to some degree, need to be reminded of the dangers. And so I think that if we can hold those things in tension, then great. And if we can't, we might need to let them go for a season. But trust the Lord, lean on others, and don't bear the burden on your own, is I guess what my parting word would be.
Uh, I've been thinking on 1 John 2 the past few days. He's writing to these people and he says, "My little children, I'm writing these things to you so that you do not sin. But if you do, right? If you do, you have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous, who is the propitiation for our sins, but not only for ours, but for the sins of the whole world." So that's what very much in line with what you're saying, but just burden for the audience of, yeah, if you're unhealthy, if you're struggling in this area, just remember you have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And he covers all of our sin and the sins of the whole world. So thank you for the time, Chris. I really appreciate it, and grateful for your work in this area, and hope to talk with you in the future about this. As the like you said, it's not going anywhere, and we need voices in this space. So grateful for yours. And is there any ways that me and the audience could pray for you just in this season of life?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm a father of two young girls, so obviously I'm thinking about these things as a parent already. My girls are not of social media age and won't be for 30 years if I have any say. Um, but yeah. So but I have I like to write. I like to work and serve in local church, and balancing all those things as a parent can be difficult. So I just ask for you and any listeners' prayers on knowing the North Star. My North Star in life is regarding how I spend my time anyway, is how can I best steward the gifts and talents God has given me for the glory of God and for the good of other people. And every day, even like fighting sin is one part of that battle, but every day I'm asking myself the question, how can I steward the gifts and talents that God has given me for his glory and for the good of other people? Am I working on the right writing projects? Am I in the right vocation? Am I spending my free time well? Like everything I try to give myself grace, but I'm just trying to run everything through that sieve, through that filter. And so I could just always be using prayer and in stewarding what he's given me well. And it feels like I'm being pulled in more directions maybe than I ever have. So um, just prayer for that ongoing discernment would be great.
We'll definitely do that. Thank you, Chris, and we'll
Of
keep you in
course.
our
Thanks for
prayers.
having me.
Thanks for the
Yeah.
conversation, and everyone, until next time, next conversation, stay tuned.